The diplomatic flagship Ambition glided through the star-laced void, its steel-gray hull catching the pale gold light of a nearby sun. Commander Elias Rourke stood at the forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, his reflection faint in the panoramic glass. Beyond the reinforced barrier, the sprawling bulk of the Concorde Assembly Station hung like a city suspended in space, ringed with docking arms and shimmering defensive fields. It was the culmination of decades of human effort. First contact, slow negotiations, then the grueling application process to join the interstellar coalition known as the Concord of Sapience. Today, humanity would be formally inducted, and yet Elias could not shake the sense that they were stepping into a room where the door might close behind them. Dr. Amara Voss stood a pace to his right, her posture rigid but her eyes restless, scanning the alien ships flitting around the station. "They've gathered every major species," she murmured. "You realize most of them expect us to embarrass ourselves before lunch." Her tone was dry, but the weight behind it was genuine. Rourke gave a small grunt. "Then we'll just have to ruin their day." His voice carried the steady calm of a man who had faced enemy fire before, but Amara caught the flicker of tension in his jaw. Docking clearance came through in a series of clicks and trills from the station's traffic AI, translated into flat human standard. The Ambition slid into its berth with barely a tremor, magnetic clamps locking onto its flanks. The boarding tube extended with mechanical precision. Rourke took a deep breath before stepping forward. Behind him trailed the human delegation. Military attaches in crisp uniforms, scientists in tailored formal wear, and diplomats wearing carefully neutral expressions. The grand hall of the Concord Assembly was a cathedral of glass and light, its soaring walls projecting shifting constellations from the archives of 100 worlds. Delegates of every imaginable form moved in the vast chamber, tall insectoid monarchs in jewel carapaces, serpentine scholars with silver-scale hides, beings of living crystal whose voices shimmered like wind chimes. The air was thick with a mingled sense of alien atmospheres and the quiet hum of translation fields. When humanity was announced, the ripple through the crowd was subtle but perceptible. Heads turned, frilled necks flared, and in more than one set of multifaceted eyes, Elias thought he saw calculation. The welcoming address was delivered by High Speaker Thoreen, an elegant avian humanoid whose every gesture was a practiced performance. The Concord extends recognition to the species Homo sapiens, native to Sol 3, for their achievements in interstellar navigation, resource management, and diplomatic initiative. Her words were polite, but the careful omissions, the lack of reference to scientific leadership or cultural influence, spoke louder than the speech itself. The reception that followed was an exercise in both patience and performance. Elias and Amara moved through clusters of alien officials, trading pleasantries, answering cautious questions. It was during a pause near the central fountain, a suspension of liquid spheres cycling in a gravity-controlled pattern, that veiled toward the SSYTH Dominion approached. The SSYTH were a predatory reptilian species, tall and broad-shouldered, with ridged crests sweeping back from their skulls. Veiled Tor's amber eyes fixed on Elias with a slow, assessing blink. "So," he said in accented standard, "the Concord admits children who have barely learned to walk among the stars. Let us hope they do not stumble carrying the torches." His mouth curled in what might have been a smile, though the rows of serrated teeth suggested otherwise. Several nearby delegates gave approving murmurs, their expressions inscrutable. Elias forced a polite nod. Children learn quickly, especially when the stakes are survival. Veiled Tor tilted his head, clearly unimpressed, and moved on. Amara's fingers tightened around her glass. "They're not wrong to be wary," she whispered. "We move fast, too fast for some. But what they don't realize is that speed isn't recklessness. It's adaptation." The words had barely left her lips when a sharp tone cut through the ambient music of the hall. Delegates stiffened as the voice of the Assembly Security AI resonated in every ear. "Attention. Priority alert. Deep Space Monitoring Array Sigma for reports receipt of a high-level distress transmission from Quarantine Zone Delta, the Ash Rift. Immediate council review required." Conversations froze mid-sentence. The Ash Rift was one of those places mentioned in briefings with clipped words and deliberate vagueness. Unstable space, hazardous anomalies, zero confirmed habitable worlds. Official Concorde records marked it as off-limits. The fact that a distress call had emerged from it was strange enough. That it carried Concorde encryption codes was stranger still. Within minutes, the central dais of the hall retracted into a holodeble, projecting a flickering map of the rift. Council members clustered, speaking in urgent tones. Most reactions were cautious bordering on fearful. One delegate, a crystalline being from the Rain Collective, noted that sending an investigation team would be a waste of assets with unacceptable loss probability. Another suggested the signal was likely a trap, or a residual echo from long-lost vessels. Elias stepped forward. The ambition is ready to respond. Humanity will investigate. A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly, followed by a low murmur that sounded almost amused. Veiled Tor's laugh was audible over chatter. By all means, Commander, the Concorde would not mourn another Terran warship lost to the void. The High Speaker hesitated, her head tilting in avian deliberation, before finally saying, "Very well. Investigation authorization granted. You may proceed at your discretion. But know this. If you provoke further instability in the rift, the consequences will be your own." Rourke inclined his head, masking the heat that flared in his chest. As he turned to leave, Amara matched his stride. "You realize they just handed us the kind of mission no one expects us to return from." "Then we'll just have to disappoint them," he replied. The docking clamps released with a deep metallic thud that reverberated through the Ambition's decks. Outside the forward viewports, the assembly station receded, its radiant structures dwindling against the black. The fleet traffic around it faded into streaks of light as the ship's engines engaged. Inside the command deck, Rourke's voice was steady over the comms. "Helm, plot a course to the Ash Rift. Best possible speed." The navigator's confirmation was crisp, followed by the subtle shift of acceleration pressing them into their seats. In the silent expanse between stars, the Ambition gathered velocity. Ahead lay a quarantined region of space where the Concorde dared not tread, and where a signal, faint but persistent, called them onward. Somewhere beyond the rift's shimmering boundary, an unknown awaited, and for the first time that day, Elias Rourke allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The Concorde might see humanity as untested children, but they had just given those children a match and pointed them toward the dark. The ash rift loomed ahead like a bruise on the fabric of space, its edges shimmering with unstable gravitational distortions. Beyond its threshold, the stars seemed warped and stretched, their light bending in slow, unnatural ripples. On the Ambition's bridge, Commander Elias Rourke studied the readouts in silence. The rift's perimeter was littered with the wreckage of ancient vessels, their twisted hulls drifting like skeletal remains. Even at this distance, sensor telemetry was patchy, as if the void itself resisted being measured. Dr. Amaravos leaned over a console, her fingers moving across the interface with quick, precise motions. "Signal's still broadcasting," she said, voice low. "But it's not just a distress call anymore. It's being amplified from within the rift. Someone or something wants to be found." Rourke's gaze flicked to her, then back to the distorted horizon. "Then we find it before it finds anyone else." The Ambition crossed the rift's boundary in a shudder of inertial strain. Shields flared under invisible pressure, and the ship's gravity plating hiccup for a heartbeat before stabilizing. Outside, clouds of dark matter swirled in luminous eddies, their currents carrying fragments of shattered moons and frozen gas. The deeper they pushed, the more the rift seemed to close around them, swallowing the faint starlight behind. Hours passed before the signal source resolved into a shape, a massive derelict starship, drifting on minimal power. Its hull bore the insignia of the Concorde, the Herald of Dawn, a dreadnought-class warship thought lost decades ago. Whole sections of its armor had been eaten away in sweeping, irregular patterns, as though something organic had burrowed through the metal. The Ambition moved incautiously, searchlights sweeping across pitted plating and gaping rents. Rourke stood as the boarding plan finalized. "I'm going in," he said. His tone left no room for debate, though Amara's brow furrowed. If that ship was abandoned in the rift, there's a reason, and it's probably still there. Rourke allowed himself a faint smile. "That's why I'm not going alone." Within minutes, the airlock cycled, and the boarding team crossed the magnetic tether to the Herald. Inside, silence pressed down like a weight. Emergency lights flickered intermittently, casting the corridors in a deep crimson glow. The air was stale and carried an acrid tang, hinting at biological decay. Scattered debris littered the passageways. Discarded weapons, scorched armor plates, clawed gouges in the walls. Amara examined one of the marks, her gloved fingers tracing its depth. Not mechanical. Something alive did this. They reached the primary data core chamber without encountering movement, though every sound, the crunch of boots on metal, the hum of their suits, felt too loud. The core itself was intact, but locked behind layers of security encryption. Rourke's comm crackled as the Ambition's tactical officer patched through. Commander, external sensors are reading movement. Multiple small contacts approaching the dreadnought from the rift's periphery. Then the first sound came from deep within the ship, a faint, wet chittering that echoed through the ducts. It was followed by another, closer, then another, until it became an overlapping chorus. Amara's eyes met Rourke's. That's not a rescue party. Shapes emerged from the shadows, sleek, many-limbed creatures with glistening black exoskeletons and eyeless, angled heads. The Hollow, Amara thought, though no one had ever confirmed their existence outside rumor. They moved like liquid across the bulkheads, claws biting into steel. Rourke snapped his rifle to his shoulder. We hold them off while you pull the core. Amara's voice was steady despite the growing cacophony. Standard decryption will take hours. Then use something they won't expect. She abandoned protocol, connecting a portable analog processor to bypass the Concorde's digital safeguards. It was crude by galactic standards, but the Hollow had evolved to exploit advanced systems. They had no defense against the obsolete. Data poured into her device as Rourke's team opened fire, plasma bolts searing through the narrow chamber. The Hollow adapted quickly, twisting their bodies to deflect shots, crawling along walls to approach from blind angles. One lunge, striking with bladed forelimbs. Rourke caught it with a burst of the thorax, sending its twitching body into the wall. A second wave followed, faster, more coordinated. Amara's display pinged. Core retrieval complete. Got it, she shouted, detaching the drive and slinging it over her shoulder. The retreat was brutal. The boarding team fell back to the corridors, sealing bulkheads as they went. But the Hollow were relentless, their claws tearing through the barriers with screeches of metal. Near the airlock, one of the creatures lunged at Amara, only for Rourke to slam it aside with the butt of his rifle, firing point blank until it stilled. They burst back onto the Ambition, airlock cycling just as the tether disengaged. Engines roared, pushing the ship clear of the dreadnought. Through the aft sensors, the Herald of Dawn receded into the rift's darkness, but not before a tendril of hollow organisms detached and drifted toward the Ambition's hull. On the bridge, Amara dropped into the science station, scanning the core's contents. It's all here. Combat recordings, biological scans, strategic data. The Concorde will have to believe us now. Rourke's gaze lingered on the drifting debris behind them. If they listen in time. Beyond the viewport, the ash rift churned and shifted, as though aware of their escape. The Hollow were not gone. They were merely waiting. And as the Ambition turned toward Concorde space, Rourke knew the hardest part was still ahead. Not surviving the rift, but convincing a council that saw humanity as expendable, that the galaxy itself was in danger. The Ambition emerged from the ash rift battered but intact, her hull pitted from near-constant stress and weapons fire. Concorde Assembly Station filled the forward view, its spires glinting against the light of a distant sun. Commander Elias Rourke stood at the bridge's center, silent as the comms officer relayed docking clearance. The crew's relief was palpable, but Rourke's gaze never left the tactical readouts. The hollow fragment clinging to hull during their escape had not appeared on any scan since, yet his instincts told him it was still there. Inside the Assembly's council chamber, the human delegation was met with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Rourke placed a recovered core drive onto the central dais, its casing still scored by battle damage. Dr. Amara Voss began the playback. Holograms flared to life, grainy but clear images of the Herald of Dawn's final hours. The footage showed the hollow breaching its hull, flowing through corridors in chitinous waves, overwhelming automated defenses with terrifying speed. Amara narrated with clinical precision, outlining the swarm's adaptive capabilities, their resistance to conventional weaponry, and their potential to bypass Concord security protocols entirely. When the recording ended, silence gripped the chamber. Vale Tor, the SSYTH Dominion, was the first to break it, his voice low but cutting, convincing theatrics. But how do we know this isn't fabrication? Humanity gains much from spreading fear, perhaps enough to justify deceit. Several delegates nodded in agreement, their expressions tightening into guarded distrust. Rourke's jaw flexed. If I wanted theatrics, Vale Tor, I'd have brought you a corpse. This is a warning. Before further debate could erupt, the Assembly Security AI interrupted. Unscheduled breach detected. Sector 12. The holodeble flickered, showing a portion of the station's outer ring flashing red. Amara's eyes widened. It's them. Even as she spoke, alarms blared. The holo had arrived, burrowing through an exterior maintenance conduit, likely carried aboard the Ambition without detection. Chaos erupted. Concord security forces scrambled, but their automated systems fell almost immediately, disabled by the swarm's evolving countermeasures. The holo poured into civilian sectors, their movement erratic and unpredictable, forcing evacuations through narrow, choked corridors. Rourke seized manual control of the nearest defense grid, overriding the AI's protest. They're anticipating the automated patterns. We go manual, break the sequence. Amara coordinated with engineers to cut power in targeted sectors, funneling the swarm toward kill zones. Human Marines, armed with jury-rigged incendiary weapons and stripped-down railguns, held choke points while station personnel rerouted life support and sealed bulkheads by hand. The holo adapted with alarming speed, altering their attack vectors, but the unpredictability of human tactics slowed their advance. Where Concord doctrine relied on precision and order, humanity embraced chaos. Ambushes from maintenance shafts, improvised explosives hidden in ventilation ducts, sudden feints that lured enemies into decompression traps. At one junction, Rourke led a squad directly into the swarm's path, baiting them into a corridor lined with exposed power conduits. Amara triggered the overload, filling the passage with blinding arcs of electricity that left the chitinous forms twitching and still. But the victory was momentary. More were coming. Over comms, Vale Tor's voice, strained but grudging, cut through. Commander Rourke, the SSYTH are engaging alongside your Marines. Direct us. Together, human and alien forces pushed the holo back toward the breach sector. The fighting was brutal. The corridors slick with alien ichor, the air thick with the stench of scorched biomass. Finally, with the last evacuation complete, Rourke ordered the sector sealed and vented into space. The swarm remnants, unable to adapt in time, were drawn into the void. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the crackle of damaged comm channels. In the aftermath, the council reconvened. Many members still bore the grime of battle, their formal garments scorched and torn. Vale Tor stepped forward, his amber eyes meeting Rourke's without the usual disdain. Perhaps I was wrong. You are not children with matches. You are the fire itself. His words, though grudging, carried the weight of an official recognition. Rourke inclined his head, but his expression remained guarded. Fire spreads, he said, and the holo will come again. Next time, they won't need the rift to reach us. The council chamber fell silent at the implication. The memory of the swarm's relentless advance still fresh in every mind. As the Ambition prepared to depart, Amara joined Rourke on the observation deck, the station's damaged ring drifting in the distance. We earned their respect, she said. Maybe even their trust. Rourke's eyes remained on the void ahead. Respect is a start, but trust won't matter if we're not ready when the next wave comes. Beyond the station's perimeter, the stars seemed calm once more. Yet somewhere in the dark, the holo were learning, evolving, preparing, and humanity, for the first time, stood not as the galaxy's untested newcomers, but as a thin line between survival and extinction. The days following the holo incursion blurred into a haze of emergency repairs, political negotiations, and sleepless nights. The Concord Assembly Station still bore its wounds, scorch plating along the breach sectors, entire habitation modules vented to the void, and corridors sealed by temporary bulkheads. Yet life aboard had resumed, if only out of necessity. Commander Elias Rourke found himself moving between tactical briefings and council sessions, the line between soldier and diplomat dissolving with each passing hour. Every conversation, whether in a chamber or a dimly lit maintenance tunnel, circled the same truth. The Hollow were no longer confined to the ash rift. Dr. Amara Voss worked in the station's xenobiology lab, poring over samples collected from the incursion site. The hollow tissue still pulsed faintly in containment, reacting to stimuli in ways that defied standard biological logic. They're not just predators, she told Rourke during one of their rare quiet moments. They're an ecosystem, adaptive, distributed, capable of reorganizing themselves for any environment. If we're going to fight them, we need to understand them as more than a threat. Rourke watched the shifting patterns in the containment field, the faint iridescence under the lab lights. Understanding is fine, he said, as long as it doesn't keep us from pulling the trigger when we have to. The council was far from unified. Some argued for sealing off the affected sectors permanently, focusing resources on defending core worlds. Others, emboldened by the Hollow's breach, urged for a preemptive strike into the rift. Veil Tor, now a reluctant ally, surprised many by advocating alongside Rourke for an immediate reconnaissance offensive. If they adapt as swiftly as the humans claim, the SSYTH delegate said, then every moment we delay increases the odds that next time we will not stop them. His words carried a new gravity, the memory of fighting shoulder to shoulder with human Marines etched into his tone. Amara's research revealed something startling. Genetic markers and hollow biomass match fragments found in deep space derelicts scattered far beyond the rift. The implication was chilling. They had been here before, perhaps countless times in the galaxy's history, leaving only ruin in their wake. The rift wasn't their prison. It was merely where they had last been contained. When she presented the data to the council, the chamber descended into uproar. Delegates demanded proof, strategies, guarantees that no one could give. That night, Rourke stood alone on the observation deck of the Ambition, the station's lights reflecting off the sleek curve of the ship's hull. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, the lines of exhaustion deepened by the faint glow of distant stars. Amara approached quietly, holding a datapad with fresh telemetry. Long-range probes picked up movement on the rift's outer edge, she said. Not just one cluster, multiple. They're spreading. He didn't turn to face her. Then we're already behind. The following day, the Concord voted, by the narrowest of margins, to authorize a joint fleet under human command for a forward mission into the rift. For the first time in its history, humanity would lead a Concord military operation. The decision was both a victory and a burden. Ships began arriving from allied worlds, their hulls gleaming under the station's repair gantries. Crews worked around the clock to retrofit weapons and reinforce shielding, incorporating human improvisations into designs that had once dismissed such ideas as crude. Rourke walked the docking bays, speaking with engineers, pilots, and Marines, his presence a quiet anchor amid the frenetic pace. Veil Tor joined him at one point, observing the human workers hauling reactor components with sheer physical strength. Your people do not wait for orders, the SSYDH noted. They move because they see the need. Rourke allowed himself a faint smile. It's how we survive. Orders catch up later. As the fleet neared readiness, Amara's team developed a prototype weapon, a variable frequency energy pulse-keyed to disrupt the Hollow's neural coordination. It was untested, volatile, and required dangerously close deployment to be effective. It might buy us time, she told Rourke, or it might burn out every system on the deploying ship. But it's the only thing we have they won't see coming. He nodded once. Then we'll make sure they never see it all. Departure day came with no ceremony. The fleet slipped from the station in disciplined silence, hundreds of vessels fanning out behind the Ambition. The ash rift loomed ahead, a dark scar against the starlit expanse. On the bridge, Rourke watched it grow in the viewport, feeling the weight of every life aboard every ship in the formation. Amara stood at the science station, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Veil Tor's voice came over the comm from his flagship. We enter as one, or we do not return at all. The rift's threshold shimmered like liquid glass as the fleet crossed into its depths. Static clawed at the comm channels, and space itself seemed to groan under the strain of so many ships forcing their way in. Sensors flared with false contacts, ghost readings, and sudden drops in mass signatures. Somewhere ahead, in the labyrinth of shifting gravity wells and fractured light, the Hollow were waiting. Rourke leaned forward, eyes locked on the swirling darkness beyond the bow. "Maintain formation," he ordered, voice calm but unyielding. "We've been underestimated before. Let's make sure they remember what a mistake that was." The fleet pressed deeper, swallowed by the rift's churning void, the unknown stretching before them like a challenge that would decide the fate of more than just humanity. And somewhere, unseen in the shifting black, the Hollow stirred.